session we have discussed the same for the digestion and the digestive system. Now, so we eat food. Okay, we eat food, we digest the food. Okay, that is the digestion of food means breaking down the food from complex substances into simpler substances. Okay, and when these substances they are broken down, or the simple food substances they are absorbed, okay, like the glucose, the amino acids, the fatty acids, we absorb them into the blood, and then they are used by the body by the process of assimilation. But there is another step. Yeah, that is one step ahead, and the step is the respiration, that is cellular respiration. That is the catabolic breakdown of the nutrient molecules, that is mainly the glucose. Okay, so we have got the glucose from the food that we have eaten. Okay, so that food has ultimately broken down into glucose. Okay, now this glucose molecule now gets further degraded, now gets further broken down by the catabolic reactions. Okay, and that is known as cellular respiration, and this entire process happens inside the cell, therefore the name cellular respiration. Okay, so therefore the name cellular respiration, because the entire process happens inside the cell, particularly in the mitochondria of the cell. Okay, so glucose and oxygen is the input, and as a result we get the ATP, which is the adenosine triphosphate, or the energy currency of the body. Okay, so therefore we call the mitochondria as the powerhouse of the cell. So mitochondria is also known as the powerhouse of the cell. So the ultimate, so the catabolic breakdown, catabolic reaction is such reaction in which the larger compound is broken down into simpler substances and it releases energy. Okay, when one complex large molecule breaks down into smaller molecule, it releases energy. Okay, that is the catabolic breakdown or the catabolic reaction. And the ultimate goal is the production of the adenosine triphosphate, that is the ATP. Okay, and please note that we also require oxygen. So glucose we have got from the digestion. Okay, but for the oxygen, for the cellular respiration to take place, we also require oxygen. That oxygen is taken from the atmosphere. Okay, so we have 21% of the atmospheric composition is with the oxygen element. So we have atmospheric oxygen. This atmospheric oxygen has to reach to the cells. Okay. And this is facilitated by the respiratory system, or that we commonly call as pulmonary ventilation or breathing. So when we say that we are talking about respiration, so there are two aspects. One aspect is the breathing, that is the exchange of gases. Okay. The exchange of gases, or mainly the intake of the oxygen. That oxygen, it transports via the blood to the different cells, into the mitochondria of the cells, and there the cellular respiration takes place and energy is released to sustain life. Okay, so the physical exchange of the atmospheric oxygen with the carbon dioxide that is produced by the cells is known as the pulmonary ventilation or breathing, or it is also known as the external respiration, one and the same thing. Okay, so the oxygen is merely the fuel here. The currency of life is the ATP that is used for biosynthetic, osmotic, as well as the mechanical work. So all the energy that we get is from the ATP. Okay. Now, different organisms, okay, in the animal world particularly, they have different parts that are developed for this exchange of gases. Okay, because cellular respiration takes place in all the eukaryotic cells. Okay, because the eukaryotic cells they have mitochondria, so the cellular respiration will take place, but the mechanism by which the organism gets the oxygen, that is different. Okay, so in the lower invertebrates, the exchange of gases takes place via the simple diffusion over the entire body surface. So entire body surface facilitates the diffusion of gases inside the body as well as the outside. Okay, and it follows the gradient, the concentration gradient. So if the concentration of oxygen is greater on the outside and is less on inside, then the oxygen will move inside the body. And if the carbon dioxide buildup is more in the inside the body and is less concentration is outside the body, then the carbon dioxide gas will move out of the body. Then in insects, we have specialized network of tubes that are called trachea. Okay. So in insects, the exchange of gases takes place via the trachea, which is a specialized network of tubes. In the aquatic arthropods, like we have the vascular structures called the gills in the fishes. So in fishes, we have the gills which are responsible for this exchange of gases. So that dissolved the oxygen as well as the carbon dioxide that is dissolved in water that gets exchanged. In the amphibians, okay, the lungs as well as the moist skin. Okay, so because amphibians are such animals which can survive both on land as well as in water. So the amphibians they have lungs for the terrestrial respiration if they are on the land, and when the amphibians are in the water, they breathe with the help of their moist skin. And the breathing by the moist skin or the exchange of gases by the moist skin is known as cutaneous respiration. And then comes in the evolutionary ladder, the highest organisms, that is the mammals, the most highly evolved organism, that is mammals. In mammals, we have developed vascularized bags. Okay. In mammals, we have something called the lungs. So these are the vascularized bags, and these are responsible for the exchange of gases or the pulmonary breathing or the pulmonary ventilation. Now, now let's discuss about the different parts of the human respiratory tract. Okay, starting with the upper respiratory tract. So in the upper respiratory tract, the respiratory system starts with the nostrils and the nasal chamber. Okay, so it all starts in the nose. This is the nostrils, and here we have the nasal cavity or the nasal chamber. The nasal chamber as well as the nasal cavity or this entire passage is lined by hair, small minute hairs and mucus to filter the dust, to filter the dust particles, to trap the incoming dust particles or some harmful pathogens. We have these mucus and hair. Okay, so that traps the impurities of the air. Now, these are highly vascularized to warm and humidify the air to the body temperature. Okay. So if the air is very cold, okay, if the air is really warm or hot, okay, it is brought to body's temperature in the nasal chamber itself. Then we have the pharynx. Now, this pharynx, we have already discussed about this when we were discussing about digestion. So this is the common passage for both the food as well as the air. So mouth, through mouth the food enters, through the nose the air enters. So here we have the pharynx, which is the common passage, common area through which both the food as well as the air they pass on. Okay. The pharynx opens into the larynx. Okay. Then we have the epiglottis. Now this is a thin, elastic, cartilaginous flap. Okay, it is made up of cartilage. Okay, so it's a cartilage flap that covers the glottis during swallowing to prevent the entry of food. So it acts like a lid. Okay, the epiglottis acts like a lid. So while we are eating food, okay, the epiglottis closes the windpipe, so that the food doesn't enter the windpipe. Okay. Then we have the larynx, that is also known as the sound box. Now, these are also made up of cartilage and they house the vocal cords. Okay. And when we breathe out, okay, or they create vibrations when we breathe out during the exhalation. Okay. During the process of exhalation, when we breathe out, they vibrate and they create the sound. Now, from the upper respiratory tract, now let's move to the conducting zone. That is the trachea as well as the bronchi. Now, trachea, also known as the windpipe, so it's a straight tube that extends to the mid-thoracic cavity. Thoracic cavity is the chest cavity. Thoracic cavity is the chest cavity. So the trachea or the windpipe, it's a straight tube that extends to the mid-thoracic cavity. It is supported by incomplete cartilaginous rings. Okay. cartilaginous rings that to prevent collapse. So the rings, they are made up of cartilage, okay, incomplete rings, okay, and they are there to prevent the collapse of the windpipe, because the windpipe it tolerates a lot of pressure gradient. Okay, so sometimes the pressure is high, sometimes the pressure is low. So due to this difference of pressures, okay, to prevent the collapse of the windpipe, these rings that are made up of cartilage, they are there. Then the trachea or the windpipe, it bifurcates. Okay? It bifurcates into the primary bronchi. Okay, it branches into the primary bronchi and it divides at the fifth thoracic vertebra into left as well as the right. Okay, so then the branching system comes. We have the primary bronchi, then we have the secondary bronchi, then the tertiary bronchi, and finally we have the bronchioles, and ultimately we have the terminal bronchioles. Okay, so this is a branched structure. Okay, so one trachea divides into two primary bronchi. The primary bronchi further divides into the branching system, including secondary bronchi. The secondary bronchi, they further divide into the tertiary bronchi, then the bronchioles, and ultimately the terminal bronchioles. And at the and these are the terminal bronchioles, the last ones. Okay. The function of this entire conducting zone. So air enters via the nasal cavity through the windpipe, through the trachea, and it travels through these bronchioles or the bronchi. So the function is it transports the air, it clears the foreign particles and humidifies the flow before reaching the exchange zone. Okay, so before reaching the exchange zone, it humidifies the air. Okay, it clears out all the foreign particles. Okay, and as a result, the purified air, okay, it reaches the exchange zone. Okay, now what is this exchange zone? The exchange zone is the lungs. Okay, lungs is the compartment that houses all these things. Okay, the actual exchange zone is the alveoli. Okay, so lungs, which are located in the airtight thoracic chamber, they are covered by double layered pleura. Okay, so they are covered by double layered pleura, and this pleura is filled with fluid to reduce the friction. Now, the alveoli is the vascularized irregular wall sacs. Okay, so these are small sac-like structure. It and these are the sites of the actual exchange of gases. Okay, the site of actual diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Okay, so if in the blood the carbon dioxide is more, okay, then the excess of carbon dioxide diffuses into the alveoli. The air that is in the alveoli, that is rich in oxygen. Okay, so the oxygen diffuses into the blood vessels. Okay, so here the deoxygenated blood becomes the oxygenated blood. Carbon dioxide is removed from the blood and oxygen is added to the blood. Now let's discuss the physics behind all this. Okay, the physics behind the breathing, the inspiration as well as the exhalation, okay, or the expiration. So when we inspire or when we take a breath, okay, or when we breathe in, okay, so what actually happens is the ultimate goal is to create a negative pressure. Okay, so we have a specialized muscle, that is the diaphragm. Okay, we have a specialized muscle at the base of our thoracic cavity, that is known as diaphragm. Okay, so when this diaphragm it contracts, that means it flattens out. Okay, so this diaphragm it flattens out. Okay, it increases the volume in the anteroposterior axis or in the thoracic cavity. Okay, so in simple words, when the when this diaphragm it contracts, okay, it increases the volume of the chest cavity or the thoracic cavity. Now when the volume is increased, so the pressure decreases. Okay, when the volume increases, the air pressure decreases. Okay, and as a result, the outside air has higher pressure, the air inside the lungs has lower pressure, so the air starts to move in through the trachea. Okay, so as a result, we have the intrapulmonary pressure, which is lesser than the atmospheric pressure. and the air enters the thoracic cavity. During the expiration, that is during breathing out, okay, reverse thing happens. Okay, so the diaphragm relaxes, okay, it moves to its original position. As a result, the volume in the thoracic cavity and ribs also start to move inside. Okay, as a result, the volume of the thoracic cavity it decreases. Now, when the volume decreases, that means the pressure of air inside the thoracic cavity or the chest, that will increase. Okay, and the outside air will have less pressure, so the air will move out of the trachea. Okay, the air will move out of the lungs through the trachea, through the nose, it will go outside. And when we talk about the healthy breathing rate, okay, so a healthy individual, approximately 12 to 16 times, okay, they breathe in 1 minute. Okay, in 1 minute, 12 to 16, this entire cycle of diaphragm contraction as well as diaphragm relaxation that happens. Okay, and the person breathes in and breathes out 12 to 16 times in 1 minute. Now, mm, when we breathe in or breathe out, we are exchanging the gases. But actual gaseous exchange takes place on the alveoli. That is on the boundary of the alveoli and the capillary. Okay, between the alveoli capillary membrane. So suppose in the alveoli, okay, this is the alveoli, this is the terminal bronchiole. Okay, and through the terminal bronchiole, we have this alveoli or the alveolar space. In the alveolar space, we have air. Now, the air that is in the alveolar space, it has high concentration of oxygen and low concentration of carbon dioxide. Okay, it has high concentration of oxygen and low concentration of carbon dioxide. So as a result, what will happen is the oxygen then will start to enter into the blood vessels, because in the blood vessels, in the capillaries that are there, okay, in the capillaries we have low pressure of oxygen and high carbon dioxide. Okay, because the blood is deoxygenated, this is a carbon dioxide rich blood, so the oxygen will be less. So this oxygen, because the concentration is low, the oxygen from the alveolar space will start to enter the capillary, and the excess of carbon dioxide, okay, because the carbon dioxide was more, the carbon dioxide pressure was, or the concentration was more in the capillary, the carbon dioxide then will start to move into the alveolar sac or in the alveolar space. So the partial pressure gradient, the air always moves for, or any of the gas moves from high pressure to low pressure. When we are discussing about how the oxygen and carbon dioxide they are transported in the blood, okay, one fact we have to keep in mind is that carbon dioxide, the solubility of carbon dioxide in oxygen in the blood is much more than the oxygen. Okay, so solubility of carbon dioxide is 20 to 25 times more than that of the oxygen. So carbon dioxide travels by simply mixing or by simply dissolving in the plasma. Okay, but for the oxygen, to carry the oxygen, we need hemoglobin. Okay, so talking about the oxygen transport, 97% of the oxygen in the blood is carried or is transported via the red blood cells, or on the red blood cells we have the hemoglobin. Okay, we have an iron containing pigment called hemoglobin. The oxygen attaches to this hemoglobin, okay, and forms the oxyhemoglobin. Okay, so in this way, 97% of the oxygen that is transported via the blood is transported through the RBCs and with the help of the oxyhemoglobin. And 3% of the oxygen is directly dissolved in plasma and is transported like this. So each of that hemoglobin molecule, that iron containing pigment, okay, substance, it carries maximum 4 molecules of oxygen. Okay, and the binding is also reversible. Okay, so binding is also reversible in the presence of carbon monoxide. So carbon monoxide is a poisonous gas because the carbon monoxide has more affinity to this hemoglobin. Hemoglobin has many times more affinity towards the carbon monoxide than the oxygen. So if given a choice, if we give a choice to the hemoglobin that would it carry the carbon monoxide or the oxygen? Then it will go for the carbon monoxide. Okay, the because of that the transport of oxygen will suffer, and that is the reason why the carbon monoxide is a highly toxic gas. Okay, it's a deadly gas. Now, if we have to discuss the transport of the carbon dioxide, so the carbon dioxide, it mainly transports as the bicarbonate ions. So 70% of the carbon dioxide, okay, is transported as the bicarbonate, that is HCO3 negative. Okay, 20 to 25% of the carbon dioxide is transported as carb amino hemoglobin, that is bound to hemoglobin, and 7% of that is dissolved, of the carbon dioxide is directly dissolved into the plasma. So at the tissues or in the body cells, okay, there is high concentration of carbon dioxide, okay, that give rise to the bicarbonate and the H plus. At the alveoli, the low carbon concentration give rise to carbon dioxide plus plus the water, and then it is exhaled. So we can say that 100 ml of deoxygenated blood, that is the blood that is rich in carbon dioxide, it delivers 4 ml of carbon dioxide to the alveoli. Now, so till now we have discussed about the process of respiration, the respiratory system, the cellular respiration. Okay. Now let's discuss about the respiratory disorders. Okay. Because nowadays, because of the rampant air pollution, the respiratory illness or the respiratory disorders are not a very uncommon thing. Okay. So the number one system failure or the respiratory disorder that we have is the asthma. Okay. So pathology is that it is mainly happens, or the asthma happens because of the inflammation of the bronchi and the bronchioles. Okay. So those bronchi and the bronchioles which was responsible to carry or to transport the air, okay, they become inflamed, okay, and as a result their lumen starts to shrink. Okay, so their lumen starts to shrink. So as a result, very low amount of air reaches the alveoli. Okay, a very low amount of air reaches the alveoli, and proper, if the not a sufficient amount of air reaches the alveoli, so not no proper exchange of gases takes place. Okay, and the person always feel lethargic, and because of this inflammation, the symptoms are wheezing and difficulty in breathing. Then there is emphysema. Okay, so the alveolar walls are damaged. In the emphysema, the walls of the alveoli, so alveoli is, these are small sacs, okay, their walls get damaged, and because of that the respiratory surface area that is available, that should have been available for exchange of gases, that has decreased, and its primary cause is cigarette smoking. Okay, so when we say that smoking kills, so that's the reason behind it. Then we have the occupational disorders like the fibrosis. Okay, the fibrosis, that is proliferation of the fibrous tissue inside the lungs, and this is caused by long-term exposure to dust. Okay, mainly it is mainly seen in the individuals who work in the stone breaking and grinding industry or in some mining areas.